The Old Pond by Matsuo Basho. Old Pond is a haiku written by Matsuo Basho. So, what is haiku? Haiku is a poetic form of 16th century. It is of Japanese origin. Haiku is usually meditative and contemplative in nature. It usually reflects poet's impression of natural object, scene or season of the year. Haiku is written in 3 lines of 17 syllables, which are distributed in 3 lines in order of 5. Haiku even influenced imaginist writers, especially Ezra Pound. So now let's grab some information about the poet. Matsuo Basho was Japan's most famous poet during the Edo period of Japan. He was certainly famous for haiku. He was historically important in developing the form haiku during Genroku period. He was born in 1644 in Ueno, Iago province, Japan. Basho is today regarded as the master of haiku and one of the greatest poets in history of Japanese literature. He was famous for his renga, that is, his collaborative poems. Winter Days, which was published in 1684, Spring Days, which was published in 1686, and The Narrow Road to the Deep North, which was published in 1694, are the important topics of Matsuo Basho. Matsuo Basho died on November 28, 1694, in Osaka. The Old Pond is a haiku poem that deals with an ancient pond and sound made by a frog that jumps into it. This old pond is considered to be one of the greatest works of Matsuo Basho. So now let's get into the chapter. The Old Pond. A frog jumps in the sound of the water. So it's a very short poem. So now let's get a detailed explanation about the poem. So here the poet begins the poem by stating that it is a very old poem. So it mentions that it is a very old water body that the people might have abandoned it. So here the poet is mentioning an old water body, that is an old water pond which is neglected by the people. That's why it is called old. So here the poet is mentioning to an old water pond which is abandoned by the people. The jumping of the frog denotes the season of the year. So as the pond is neglected or abandoned by the people, there's no one around there. So there's complete silence. So in order to break that silence, a frog jumps into the water. So the jumping of the frog into the water creates a sound, the sound of a water, which is mentioned in the 3rd line. So it denotes that as the pond is neglected by the people, there is complete silence, there is no one over there. So when the frog jumps into the water, the silence is disturbed and the sound of a water is created. So here the poet is also mentioned that the frog had jumped in order to break a silence that prevails all around the pond. So in short, the poet here is mentioning to an old pond which is neglected by the people. So as it is neglected, there is complete silence all over the pond. So in order to break the silence, not intentionally, the frog jumps into the pond. So as the frog jumps into the pond, so the sound of a water is heard. So when the frog jumps into the water, the sound of the water is heard. So at that time, the silence which prevails all around the pond is broken. So here using haiku, Basho is showing people's negligence over a pond. So as people is neglecting that pond, it becomes old. Otherwise it won't become old. So while reading this haiku, this old pond, the reader must be imaginative. So the reader should be imaginative. Then only he or she can understand the core of the poem. So when the old pond, while reading the old pond, we should imagine the old pond or the ancient pond which is neglected by the people, and the jumping of the frog. So we should imagine the frog is being jumping into the pond. So then after it's jumping, a sound is created. The sound of the water is created. So we should imagine all those things. Then only we can understand the exact meaning of the poem. So, the jumping or the sound of the water creates a resonance in the reader's mind. So, as I mentioned before, the jumping of the frog or the frog simply denotes a season of the year. So, here the poet might have denoted it as the spring season. So, the frog denotes the spring season. So here the frog or the jumping of the frog denotes two major things. One, its reason, and the second one, its season. So the season here is denoted as the spring season, and the reason for its jumping is to break the silence which prevails around the pond. So that's all about the poem. And as I mentioned before, it is very short poem and is very easy to understand also. So I hope this video is helpful for you. Thank you.